For years, my life ran like clockwork. Steady job, active lifestyle, and a marriage I thought was built on trust. But cracks started to show. My wife's frustration surfaced as sharp remarks and icy silences. The woman I once saw as my closest ally began treating me like I was a stranger, or worse, an enemy. Despite the tension, I held on to the hope that we'd get through it. Couples go through rough patches, right? That's what I kept telling myself, until subtle changes in her routine, secretive behavior, and strange habits started raising red flags. It wasn't just a rough patch. Something deeper was going on, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The day I decided to follow her after work changed everything. My whole world fell apart that night, and as I lay sprawled on the gritty ground, dazed and hurting, I let out a low, involuntary groan. Every part of me ached, from my ribs to my head to my limbs, as though my body had been weighed down with lead. Dust filled the air with each breath, stinging my throat and making it even harder to move. I once read somewhere that your body can't register pain from multiple areas at once, but whoever wrote that was clueless. I could feel it everywhere, one big mess of throbbing agony. Through the fog of pain, I heard a voice. "Hey, idiot, ready for round 2? The words were followed by a cold, mocking laugh. I stayed still, trying to gather my thoughts, struggling to remember the basics. First came my name. James Carter, I muttered under my breath. That's me, 33 years old, an accountant, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. I keep fit by working out and running a few times a week. Sometimes I mix it up with mountain biking. I'm married to Lisa. She's 30, and we've been together 5 years. No kids, though, not because I don't want them, but because she's been putting it off. Said she wanted more time to enjoy life before settling down. That's when it all clicked. I remembered why I was lying there in the dirt, beaten and breathing in dust. Things between Lisa and me had gone downhill fast over the last couple of months. It wasn't just a lack of intimacy. It was the whole relationship. She mocked everything I did, lashed out over the smallest issues, and hurled insults about my masculinity, my appearance, even my family. She stopped doing her share around the house, leaving all the chores to me. Cooking, cleaning, things we used to do together, became my responsibility alone. The woman I once adored seemed to hate me. I didn't need a walk down memory lane right now. What mattered was the present, how things got this bad and why I decided to follow her. I'd taken the day off, determined to find out the truth. After her shift at the supermarket, she drove to a nearby convenience store. That's when things took an unexpected turn. Ever hear the phrase, "May you live in interesting times"? Yeah, well, that curse hit me hard tonight. It was one of those warm September evenings, still in the upper 60s as the sun went down. I watched her leave the store with a small overnight bag she pulled from her trunk. Seeing her pull out that bag hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't planning to come home tonight. I bought her that car, paid for everything. Actually, her job barely covered her shopping sprees for clothes and makeup. Back then, I didn't mind. I wanted her to have the best life possible. But now, watching her strut around with that bag, I felt something twist inside me. When she came out, she'd changed into a microskirt, so short it left nothing to the imagination, paired with a sheer blouse and no bra. Every move she made, swinging her hips, glancing around, was deliberate, like she wanted everyone to notice her. And it worked. Instead of heading home, she drove straight to the sleaziest biker bar in town. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against bikers. I ride myself, and most bikers I know are good guys. But this wasn't that kind of place. This wasn't where you'd find charity runs or weekend poker rides. It was a rough joint, the kind where trouble hung thick in the air. Lisa parked her car near a row of bikes, making sure anyone watching got an eyeful as she climbed out. A couple of guys near the door smiled and nodded at her like they knew her well. It was clear she wasn't new to this place. I stayed back, parking my old Dodge Power wagon out of sight. The truck isn't fancy, but it's got sentimental value. My dad bought it brand new in the 80s, and after he passed, I kept it in mint condition. Sure, I could afford something newer, but this truck means something to me. I kept most of it original, except for a lift kit and bigger tires. Even replaced the old chrome bumper with a wooden one when it rusted out. As I stepped out, The bikers gave my truck a glance before going back to their conversation. The scent of weed hung in the air, a fitting welcome for this kind of place. I wasn't dressed for work, just jeans and an old t-shirt. Following my wife wasn't exactly something you do in a business suit. I didn't blend in, but at least I wasn't sticking out like a sore thumb. Without hesitation, I headed inside. There was no cover charge, but I had a feeling I'd be paying in a different way soon enough. I made my way to the bar, keeping my head low, and ordered a beer. Nothing fancy tonight, just whatever was on tap. The bartender didn't bother with small talk, and that suited me just fine. While sipping my beer, I casually scanned the room using the back bar mirror. It didn't take long to spot Lisa. She was impossible to miss. There weren't many women in the bar that night, and Lisa stood out like a sore thumb. She wasn't just another biker chick blending into the crowd. She was perched on the lap of the biggest guy I'd ever laid eyes on. He had to be over 6 feet tall, easily 250 pounds or more, and not just from guzzling beer. The guy looked like he hit the gym regularly, with thick arms and broad shoulders that made Lisa look tiny by comparison. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I'd finish my beer and leave without causing a scene. Confronting her here, in a bar full of bikers, wasn't a smart move. But just as I was about to put down my glass, Lisa stopped kissing the giant and glanced around, clearly wanting everyone to see she had the alpha male locked down. Her eyes found me, and for a moment, I thought she might look away. Instead, she did a double take. Crap. She recognized me. I muttered a curse under my breath and shot off the stool like it was covered in grease. I didn't have a plan, just get out before things got worse. But before I could make it to the door, Lisa's voice rang out behind me, loud and clear. "That's my husband, James. Stop him. He's going to ruin this for all of us." Her words sent a ripple through the crowd. A few heads turned my way, and before I knew it, someone grabbed my arm. Without thinking, I spun around and shoved the guy hard into the wall. He hit it with a thud and let go, but I didn't stop to see if he'd recover. I had barely made it a few more steps when another guy swung at me. I ducked just in time, his fist grazing the side of my head. Instinct kicked in, and I countered with a quick punch to his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping for breath, but I didn't stick around to admire my work. I was almost at the door when a huge figure appeared, blocking my path. Someone in the back shouted, "Get him! Don't let him leave." The guy in front of me was massive, built like a linebacker, and he wasn't about to step aside. My old football coach's voice echoed in my head. "Block through your opponent, not around him." With no other choice, I dropped my shoulder and charged straight at him. I hit him hard, driving him back a few steps, but he didn't go down. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me and, with surprising strength, flipped me over his shoulder. I hit the ground outside with a hard thud, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Pain flared through my ribs and back, but I didn't have time to catch my breath. I scrambled to my feet, only to find the giant coming at me again. He was relentless, pounding me with heavy punches that I couldn't block fast enough. Each hit felt like it was breaking something. My ribs, my arms, my will to fight. "Take this, loser," he spat, landing another blow that sent me reeling. "You think you can come in here and mess with us? I'm gonna screw her 3 times tonight, just to show you who's in charge." I tried to get up, but he kicked me in the side, knocking me down again. "She comes here every night, and you get my leftovers when she gets home," he sneered. The words cut deeper than the punches, but there was nothing I could do. I was too beaten, too broken to fight back. As I lay there, barely conscious, I could hear Lisa's laughter echoing through the night, mingling with the taunts of the crowd. "Watch him," the giant said to his buddies. "If he gets up, call me. I want another go at him before I'm done." Darkness closed in, and for a while, there was nothing. When I finally came to, everything hurt. My head throbbed, my ribs felt like they were on fire, and one of my eyes wouldn't open. I figured dried blood had sealed it shut. Slowly, I worked my right hand free, wiping the blood away until I could see out of my left eye. My vision was blurry, but I could make out my truck parked nearby. The bikers who had been watching me earlier were now lounging near the building, distracted by booze and dope. They weren't paying attention, which gave me a slim chance to escape. Moving was agonizing, but I didn't have a choice. Inch by inch, I crept toward my truck, pausing every few moments to make sure no one noticed me. Each movement sent sharp jolts of pain through my ribs, but I bit down hard and kept going. By the time I reached the row of bikes near Lisa's car, I was drenched in sweat and gasping for air. I got to my knees, biting down on the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. Even shallow breaths hurt like hell, but I forced myself to stay quiet. I scanned the area again. The bikers were too busy laughing and smoking to notice me. I stayed low and shuffled toward my truck, each step a test of endurance. When I finally reached it, I unlocked the door as quietly as possible, praying the dome light wouldn't flick on. Luck was on my side. It stayed off. Hauling myself inside was a struggle, but I managed it without making too much noise. For a moment, I sat there, trying to catch my breath and figure out my next move. Starting the engine would make noise, and if they noticed me, I'd be in trouble. I glanced out the window and spotted Lisa's car about 30 yards away, parked neatly in front of a row of bikes. An idea formed in my head. It was risky, but I didn't have many options. My truck didn't have automatic hubs, so I couldn't engage four-wheel drive without getting out. Two-wheel drive would have to do. I took a deep breath, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs, and turned the key. The engine roared to life on the first try. Dropping the transmission into low gear, I floored the gas pedal. The bleary-eyed bikers by the door barely registered my truck until it was too late. By the time they noticed, I was already charging straight at Lisa's car and the line of bikes beside it. The thick wooden bumper at the front of my truck slammed into the left side of her car with a deafening crash. Her lightweight car lifted off the ground, and I kept pushing forward, shoving it into the row of bikes. The sound of metal grinding against metal and the furious shouts of the bikers filled the air. I kept my foot on the gas, forcing the wreckage across the lot. When my progress slowed, I quickly shifted into reverse, relieved nothing got stuck beneath the truck. I backed up a few feet, twisted the wheel, and shifted into second gear. With a roar from the engine, I plowed through the remaining bikes, this time shoving them hard enough to block the bar's main entrance. Anyone inside would have a hell of a time getting out. Part of me wanted to take it a step further, ram the building itself, bring the whole place down on Lisa and her oversized boyfriend. But I wasn't stupid. I couldn't afford to get stuck here. With one last glance at the chaos I'd created, I spun the truck around, kicking up a cloud of dust as I sped out of the lot and back onto the highway. Pain flared through my body with every movement. Steering, shifting gears, even breathing hurt like hell. I needed a hospital, but not the local one. If Lisa or Behemoth went looking for me, that would be the first place they'd check. I decided to head west, toward a trauma center about 50 miles away. The two-lane highway stretched ahead of me, empty for the first few miles, giving me a moment to catch my breath and think. Just as I started to relax, I noticed headlights in the distance behind me. At first, I hoped it was just another vehicle, but soon more lights appeared, and they were closing in fast. No flashing red or blue lights, definitely not cops. As they got closer, I recognized the unmistakable glow of motorcycle headlights. "Damn it," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. I guess I hadn't taken out all the bikers after all. A couple of them pulled up alongside me, and I heard the metallic clatter of chains bouncing off the truck's sides. They weren't likely to damage the truck, but they'd definitely mess up the paint job. My mind raced as I tried to come up with a plan. Outrunning them wasn't an option. Those bikes were faster than my old truck. I needed another way to shake them off. In desperation, I swerved sharply over the center line, forcing the two bikes beside me off the road. The big machines didn't handle well in the ditch, and both riders lost control, crashing into the dirt. I didn't have time to celebrate. More bikers were coming up on my right. Another quick swerve sent them into the gravel shoulder, and I caught a glimpse of one guy cartwheeling off his bike before I turned my attention back to the road. I still had several more on my tail, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried something more dangerous, like jumping into the truck bed. If that happened, I'd be in serious trouble. Desperate, I slammed on the brakes, causing one of the bikes to rear-end me with a small thump. I didn't wait to see if they recovered. I hit the gas again, and when I checked the rearview mirror, there were no more headlights behind me. Is it really that easy to beat a motorcycle? I muttered. In movies, Bikers always seemed invincible, hounding drivers until they either won or ran them off the road. Apparently, reality was a little different. As I neared Centerville and the trauma center, my mind raced with new worries. How could I keep Lisa and Behemoth from finding me? If they couldn't find me at the local hospital, they might start searching nearby towns. I needed somewhere to hide, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. That's when I remembered an old acquaintance who owned some land near Centerville. He rarely visited, and the property had been abandoned for years. It wasn't much, just an old farmhouse and a barn surrounded by trees, but it might be the perfect place to lay low for a while. I turned off the highway and made my way toward the ranch, hoping it was still as isolated as I remembered. The place was exactly as I'd hoped, run down and forgotten, hidden behind a row of tall trees. I pulled in behind the barn, parking the truck out of sight. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my ribs, but I forced myself to keep going. I left my wallet and ID in the cab, placing the keys on top of the rear wheel where they wouldn't be easy to spot. Walking was pure agony, but I needed to put some distance between me and the truck before calling for help. After what felt like forever, I made it about a mile down a gravel road before the pain became too much. My breathing was shallow and ragged, each breath a struggle. I sat down by the side of the road, pulling out my cell phone with shaking hands. When the emergency operator answered, I whispered, "Help me. I was abducted and beaten. I woke up on the side of the road. I don't know where I am. Please send help." Everything I said was technically true, except for not knowing my location. I figured they could trace the call using my phone's GPS. The operator kept asking for landmarks, but I didn't have the strength to keep talking. I let the phone fall to my side, hoping they'd find me soon. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, someone was bending over me. Panic shot through me as I tried to figure out who it was. Had Behemoth or one of his buddies found me? It couldn't have been Lisa. I'd wrecked her car, and unless she had another ride, she wouldn't be here. The man kept asking questions, but my voice was barely more than a whisper. My throat was dry, and the beating had left me too weak to speak properly. I made up a name on the spot. "John Baker," I croaked. "I live in Carterville. I'm 40, allergic to penicillin." The man didn't seem to question it. Without any ID on me, no one could prove otherwise. All I had to do was stick to my story. I told the man that I must have been mugged, knocked out, and dumped here on the side of the road. I asked him what day it was, holding my breath for the answer. When he told me, I nearly sighed in relief. It hadn't been more than a day since the fight. That was one small mercy. Before long, an ambulance arrived, and the paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher. As they worked, one of them started in 4 and gave me something for the nausea and pain. I didn't complain much, except for a few grunts when the stretcher hit bumps along the way. Within minutes, we reached the trauma center. A nurse with a kind smile carefully cleaned the dried blood off my face, while the doctor inspected my injuries, tut-tooting in concern. I stuck to my story. I'd been abducted, knocked around, and dumped in a rural area. I explained that my wallet was missing, so I had no ID, and when they asked for my birth date, I gave them a fake one, combining my mom's birthday with my brother's birth year. It would make me 36 instead of 40, but I figured it wouldn't matter much. I could remember the lie easily enough, and given the state I was in, no one was going to question me too hard. Soon, a police officer arrived and began asking questions. I kept my answers simple, claiming that I'd been abducted near a small town not far from Centerville. It was easy to name one, given how many little towns dotted the area. But when he asked for my home address, I realized I had to think fast. Too many lies could trip me up if I wasn't careful. I told him I was divorced and lived alone. That would be easier to manage than pretending to have a family or roommates. Then he threw a strange question at me. "Do you ride a motorcycle?" I kept my expression neutral and answered honestly. "I used to years ago, but I haven't owned a bike in a long time. Why do you ask?" He gave a slight nod before explaining. "We're investigating an accident, actually a series of accidents, about 20 miles from here. 2 bikers were killed, and 6 others were injured, ranging from broken bones to severe head trauma. None of the survivors can tell us exactly what happened. We're looking into the possibility that a rival gang might have caused it. Doesn't add up otherwise. These guys are hardcore riders, and crashes like this aren't normal. I shook my head slowly, trying to seem as clueless as possible. I don't even know anyone in a bike club, I said. No one I work with owns a bike or does poker runs or anything like that. The officer leaned forward, studying me closely. Any idea who might have wanted to hurt you? Nope, I replied quickly. I'm divorced. Live alone. I work on a non-union construction site, but we haven't had any trouble with union guys in a while. I go out for a beer once a week, but I don't get drunk anymore. I had a drinking problem a while back and learned my lesson after it cost me my marriage. My ex-wife remarried, and as far as I know, she's doing fine. I doubt her husband's jealous. She probably tells him all the awful things I used to do. The officer didn't look entirely convinced, but after a moment, he nodded and left. A nurse came in shortly after, her expression sympathetic. The doctor wants you to stay overnight. He's concerned about your kidney function. There was some blood in your urine, and you've got a couple of broken ribs. We can't do much for those except give you pain medication to help you breathe properly. I nodded, too exhausted to argue. Once she left, I pulled out my phone and called my brother, Brian. He picked up after a few rings, sounding groggy. I know it's early, I said, but I need some help. Brian was always laid back, never one to ask too many questions. What's going on? He asked, his voice steady despite the hour. I explained the situation, including where I was and the fake name I'd given the hospital. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, he asked, "What do you need right now?" "I need my stuff from the house," I said. "Can you arrange for a mover who won't ask questions? And make sure Lisa doesn't interfere. Just get everything into a storage unit." Brian didn't hesitate. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, he knew plenty of guys who could handle a job like that. "Yeah, I can take care of it. Text me a list of what you want." I sent him the list, not caring if the movers had to force their way in. Next, I called Tom, an old friend and a realtor I trusted. "Tom, I need a quick favor." "No problem, James. What's going on?" Tom's voice was calm, as always. "Lisa's cheating on me with some biker. I don't know his name, but he hangs out at Tony's on the edge of town. I'm not worried about him right now. That'll come later. What I need is to list my house and sell it fast, so Lisa can't move that idiot in." There was a brief pause before Tom responded, his tone serious. "All right, I get it. But what happens if Lisa's at the house when I show up to do the market assessment and put the sign up?" "Right now, she's just a tenant," I replied. "She doesn't have any say in the ownership." Tom hesitated. "Okay, but what do I do if she tries to fight it?" I thought for a moment before answering. "Act like my rental manager. Take her a month-to-month lease agreement and tell her she has to maintain the property in sellable condition and be ready for showings. Make it clear that if she doesn't sign, she'll be evicted." Tom let out a low chuckle. "I don't think she's smart enough to fight it until she gets a lawyer, and I doubt she'll do that until she gets served." I told him about the movers who'd be coming soon, and he agreed to coordinate with them. "I'll get it done, James. Just take care of yourself." Once the call ended, I lay back in the hospital bed, exhaustion weighing me down. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, I had a plan, and that was better than nothing. Brian chuckled before hanging up, saying he'd pick up a new lock for whichever door got breached. He wasn't the type to ask too many questions, and I appreciated that. After the call, the hospital staff moved me to a new room. They brought me some breakfast, which I barely touched, and before long, I managed to fall into a fitful sleep. I wasn't planning on calling a lawyer just yet. I wanted Lisa to stew for a couple of days, let the reality of her new situation sink in. I figured she'd be trying to call me nonstop, and I was right. By the time I woke up, there were multiple missed calls and texts. But I wasn't ready to deal with her nonsense. Instead, I waited for Brian to call me back. "James, it's all done," Brian said later that afternoon. His voice was steady, businesslike. "The guys went in and grabbed your recliner, microwave, washer and dryer, guest bedroom set, your tools, and the tool safe. Oh, and all the dishes, pans, and utensils too, even though you didn't ask for those. They figured it'd make things extra inconvenient for Lisa." I sighed, rubbing my temple. "And the bed in the master suite?" Brian hesitated for a moment. "Well, some bleach got spilled on it. I don't think it's salvageable. The room might need a couple of days to air out." I couldn't help but chuckle, though it twisted something inside me. Was she there? They didn't see her anywhere, Brian replied. I think they were hoping for a confrontation. You know how those guys are. They don't like witches. Yeah, I agreed, though my tone was flat. The call wrapped up with Brian saying he'd come pick me up when I was discharged. Now, you might be wondering how I was handling the finances. Did Lisa have time to drain the bank accounts? The answer was no. I'm an accountant, a good one. Some of my clients come from the old neighborhood, and let's just say their income isn't always from conventional sources. I help make sure their money looks clean to the IRS. Thanks to that experience, I had safeguards in place. Lisa only had access to her personal account and a joint account that I regularly deposited into. But the savings and investment accounts? Those were off limits. Sure, she might get half of them later if things went to court, but for now, she had nothing but her cashier wages and whatever Behemoth was willing to cover. I checked the joint account balance. She'd withdrawn all the cash she could. No problem. My personal account, where my paycheck went, was at a different bank entirely. Around 6 in the evening, Tom, the realtor, called me back. I didn't know he harbored any resentment toward Lisa until he started talking. James, your wife was pretty upset when I showed up at the house this afternoon, Tom began. Apparently, the front door was wide open when she got home, and a lot of stuff was missing. At first, she was polite, but when I pulled out the new lock and started replacing the old one, she flipped. She wasn't happy about that? I asked, imagining her reaction. Not in the slightest. She wasn't thrilled when I secured the new key in a lockbox either, Tom added, his tone laced with amusement. By the way, you're going to need a new front door. The old one's too damaged. It might hurt the sale. I chuckled despite myself. The pain meds were helping, but hearing about Lisa's frustration brought its own kind of relief. Did she give you any trouble about the lease? I asked. Oh yeah, that went over like a lead balloon, Tom replied, laughing bitterly. When I told her the house was for sale, she lost it. Told me to get out, but I reminded her that I'm now the rental manager and only the property owner can make me leave. Then I handed her the lease. Naturally, she refused to sign and kept demanding to know where you were. Have you blocked her number yet? He asked. She kept saying you weren't answering her calls. I groaned. Yeah, she's blocked. Did you tell her she'd be evicted if she doesn't sign? Of course, Tom said. But you know how some people think they're smarter than everyone else. I gave her 24 hours to sign, or I'll serve the eviction notice. Honestly, I hope she doesn't sign. If she doesn't, she'll be out in 30 days. I know a couple of sheriff's deputies who can't stand cheating wives. They'd be happy to help move her out, even if it's just to the curb. After we hung up, I checked my phone. Sure enough, there were several missed calls and multiple texts from Lisa, starting around midnight the previous night. Instead of deleting them, I saved everything. Texts, voicemails, the whole lot. It might come in handy later for my divorce attorney. That night, I managed to sleep surprisingly well. Maybe it was the pain meds, or maybe it was the thought of Lisa fuming over her situation that helped me relax. The next morning, the doctor came by with good news. I was being discharged. My kidney function had improved, and my breathing was stable. You're not going to be doing any running for a while, he warned, but you'll recover. Just take care of yourself, and no more getting abducted. I promised to follow his advice, though we both knew that avoiding trouble wasn't always up to me. Before Brian arrived, I corrected my name for hospital admissions and called the office to make sure the insurance details were sorted out, since I still didn't have my wallet. When Brian showed up, he helped me get to my truck, and we headed back toward town. I wasn't exactly eager to return. This place didn't feel like home anymore. In fact, I was officially homeless now, at least for the time being. Once we got into town, I checked in with work. My boss wasn't thrilled about my disappearance, but calmed down when I explained that I'd been abducted, beaten, and left for dead. He asked who might have done it, mentioning that Lisa had been trying to find me. I couldn't help but laugh dryly. She can go to hell, I said bluntly. I arranged to take a few more days off, since things were slow. With tax season still far off and the quarterly reports done, it wasn't a big deal. By the end of the day, I found an apartment near my office. The economy wasn't great, but that meant rent was affordable. I signed a year-long lease, paid the necessary deposits, and had the utilities transferred to my name. I also called my cell phone provider and switched my plan to month. I scheduled Lisa's phone line to be shut off in a few days. That would give me enough time to send her a message. She was on her own now. After finishing up with Tom, I decided to head to a furniture rental place. I picked out a couch, a bedroom set, and a basic kitchen package. Pots, pans, dishes, utensils, the works. Sure, Brian's friends had taken all those things from the house, but I figured I could give them back to Lisa if she ever asked. Honestly, though, I doubted she would. Once everything was arranged, I called Brian and set up a time for the movers to bring over my stuff. Later, sitting alone in my new, mostly empty apartment, I stared at my phone. I debated whether to call Lisa. Part of me wanted to avoid her altogether, but another part of me, the part still stinging from everything she'd done, wanted to hear her squirm. Before I could talk myself out of it, I hit the call button. To my surprise, she picked up on the first ring. Hello? Is that you, James? Unless someone stole my phone, it must be you. Why do you always have to be so insulting? I shot back, already annoyed by her tone. Where are you, and why haven't you been home? She asked, her voice icy. Are you that stupid? I didn't hesitate. I stopped at a bar to have a beer and saw you with your new lover. I didn't even try to confront you because, after the way you've been treating me for the past few months, it was obvious you'd found someone else. I was just the guy paying your bills. I tried to leave quietly, but your boyfriend decided otherwise. He beat me up while you stood there and laughed. I ended up in the hospital for days, wondering if my ribs or kidneys would give out. And now you're asking why I haven't been back to the house? Are you really that deranged? Why would I go anywhere near you, so that your new man can finish the job? Do you want me dead? Lisa started rambling, spitting out a string of nonsensical excuses, but I cut her off, my voice cold. I hope you're recording this. Is that what you've been planning? Get me killed, then spin a story about how I was jealous of your innocent friendship with that idiot? Then you get the house, my money, my pension, and my life insurance. Bravo. Too bad I ruined your little scheme. There was a long pause. Then, to my surprise, I heard her start to cry. I need you to come home. Everything's gone wrong, she sobbed. The house is for sale. Stuff's missing. I think someone broke in before I got home and stole things. I scoffed, a dark amusement creeping into my voice. Yeah, someone I know did break in. They took my stuff, things I needed to set up my new place. I'll be all set up by tomorrow. Sucks to be you, but I'm sure your new man will be there to comfort you. How could you be so cruel? She cried, her voice frantic. That realtor said I have to pay rent. Why do I have to pay rent for our home? This isn't right. I couldn't help but snort. Right? You want to talk about what's right? What happened to us? Are you really that clueless? Or do you think I'm the one who's dumb? Look in the mirror if you want your answer. You treated me like garbage for months, started a relationship with a dirtbag, and spent my money on new clothes and nights out with him. That night at the bar wasn't the first time you were with him. Everyone there knew who you were and who you belonged to. Then you stood by and laughed while he beat me half to death. If I'd made any noise when I woke up, he would have finished the job. I have no doubt about that. I paused, letting my words sink in before delivering the final blow. So kiss my ass. You're a renter now, and Tom is your landlord. Don't talk to me about rent. Just pay it, or get out. She went quiet for a moment, then asked, But I need money. There's nothing left in the checking account. There won't be, I said flatly. I'll keep paying the utilities until the house sells, but you'll be covering the rent with your paycheck. You have a job. Stop blowing your money on clothes and makeup. You've got enough to get by. Or better yet, have your boyfriend cover your expenses. Her voice cracked as she responded. But you're my husband. You're supposed to take care of me. And as my wife, you were supposed to cheer for me, not your boyfriend, while he and his friends kicked the crap out of me. Guess we both lose, huh? There was another long pause before she spoke again, her voice trembling. What about a car? Mine's totaled. I need a way to get to work. I couldn't resist. Call your boyfriend. You can ride on the back of his bike. You're already used to straddling something that belongs to him. Her response was immediate and sharp. He's in the hospital with a head injury and multiple broken bones. He was chasing you when you hit the brakes, and he went flying. He landed headfirst. Karma, I guess. Too bad he didn't die, I said coldly. Tell him I'll be keeping an eye out. If I see him first, I'll avoid him. Otherwise, I'll be carrying my tool, and this time I'll be shooting instead of talking. The excuses kept coming, but I didn't care anymore. Eat crap and die, I said before hanging up. Her number was still blocked, so I didn't even have to turn off my phone to avoid her nonsense. I tried to sleep that night, but it didn't go well. With no bed and too much pain to lie on the floor, I gave up and checked into a decent motel just to get some rest. It was worth every penny to sleep in a real bed, even if it took every ounce of energy I had to drag myself out of it the next morning. After grabbing a quick breakfast, I headed back to the apartment. Before long, Brian's crew showed up and unloaded all my stuff. They did a good job setting everything up, so I gave each of them an extra $100 for their trouble. Not long after that, the rental place delivered the couch and other items. I tipped them as well, knowing I'd need to hit the bank soon for more cash. I like to keep a couple thousand in cash stashed somewhere easy to grab. I'm not a saint, and with certain clients who operate in the gray areas of legality, it's good to be prepared. You never know when someone might take an interest in your accounting services, and not in a good way. With my go bag ready and safely stored away, not at my old house, I sat back in my recliner and started thinking. What now? Should I lay low, or go about my life as if everything was normal? When should I file for divorce? I briefly considered stringing Lisa along, making her think we might reconcile, only to drop her later. But what was the point? She'd just cling to Behemoth, or whoever came after him. In our state, fault didn't matter in divorce. A judge wouldn't care about her affair unless her boyfriend ended up in jail for what they did to me. The assets would get split. At least half would go to her. I couldn't stop that, but I could make her life miserable until then. No more gravy train. She'd have to fend for herself now. The house was priced to sell quickly. Once it was gone, she was on her own. As for Behemoth, I didn't know how bad his injuries were, but I hoped they were permanent. A life stuck in a wheelchair or hooked up to a feeding tube seemed fitting. His friends? They deserved just as much pain. I didn't doubt they'd come looking for payback eventually, so I decided to be ready. I went to my tool safe, pulled out my judge, and loaded it with .410 slugs. It's a 5-round revolver that can fire .45 long Colt rounds or .410 shells, powerful enough to blast through concrete. I kept it on me at all times, both in the apartment and outside, with extra shells in my leg bag. I figured it was better to wait and see if they made the first move. If they did, I wouldn't be caught off guard again. The next few days were uneventful. I went back to work, keeping the judge within easy reach. Then Lisa started texting me from a new number. She acted like we'd just had a minor argument and asked when I was coming home. I ignored her at first, but when I finally asked about Behemoth, she pretended not to understand. After I pressed her, she admitted, Mark is doing better, but he might not walk or ride again. Mark. The name didn't exactly inspire fear. I couldn't help but smirk. So much for Behemoth. She kept asking when I'd come home. I told her, never, and hung up. Then I blocked her new number. A few days later, I noticed a biker following me from work. He didn't exactly blend in. Long beard, leathers, standing out like a sore thumb in the business district. I took a series of sharp turns, losing him in traffic. The next day, another biker tried to follow me. This time, I led him straight to Lisa's house, figuring he didn't know where she lived. After he passed, I doubled back and went home, hoping for a quieter night. My bruises were healing, but I still felt like I'd been hit by a truck. The next morning, 2 cops showed up at my office. They said Lisa's house had been vandalized and she'd accused me of doing it. I quickly pointed out how ridiculous that was. Damaging the house would lower its sale price, and I wanted it sold fast. I explained that Lisa was having an affair with Mark, the guy who beat me up, and suggested they question him. They exchanged glances, seeming to reconsider. One officer mentioned reports of loud motorcycles outside my apartment the night before. I told them I'd stopped by Lisa's place briefly to grab more of my things and speculated that someone might have followed me, thinking I still lived there. I also made sure to mention that Lisa still hadn't signed the lease and would need renter's insurance to cover the damage. One of the officers chuckled. Couldn't happen to a nicer person, he muttered. I spoke to her yesterday, I said. She's refusing to sign the lease. Maybe she'll reconsider once you show up with an officer to explain she's responsible for keeping the place livable. You're not behind her discomfort, are you? The officer asked. No, I said. But a couple of bikers, probably Behemoth's friends, have been trying to follow me. I led one of them past her house yesterday. I'm guessing they vandalized the place, thinking I still live there. You should definitely talk to Mark. The officer gave a slight nod before they left. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Lisa, calling from another unknown number. What do you want? I asked flatly. Why are you trying to get the cops on me? She snapped. Why would you vandalize a house you're trying to sell? Are you on something? Her aggression caught me off guard, but I quickly recovered. You seriously think I'd damage a property I'm trying to sell? There was a pause, and then she spoke in a quieter tone. James, I'm sorry. When you were mad at me, I thought you might have done it. After the cops left, I called Mark. He admitted some of his friends might have been looking for revenge. You hurt a lot of guys and damaged their bikes. I couldn't hold back my frustration. I hurt them? I was the one knocked out cold after your idiot boyfriend attacked me. I don't know how you can say I hurt anyone. I was in the hospital. Lisa's voice wavered, but she pressed on. Mark and his crew think you ran them off the road. They were just trying to stop you from going to the cops. You didn't have to hurt anyone, Lisa muttered. Jesus, I said, exasperated. Do you hear yourself? I was the one knocked unconscious. Your boyfriend had people waiting to finish me off while you stood there cheering him on. Now, his friends trashed your house, and you're trying to pin it on me? Keep popping those pills. You'll be turning tricks for Behemoth soon. She tried to protest, her voice rising in anger, but I cut her off. Shut up and listen. Tom will be over today to assess the damage for the insurance claim. I've insured the house as a rental now, not a private home. You'll need renter's insurance. This is our home, not a rental, she exclaimed, disbelief in her voice. Why are you doing this? I took a breath, trying to stay calm. What part of cheating on me and throwing away our marriage don't you understand? You started the affair, stood by while he beat me, and wanted me hurt. This is all on you. I ended the call before she could respond, furious and aching from the stress. Later, as I left work, another biker was waiting in the distance. He didn't try to hide, trailing me from a couple of cars back. I drove toward Centerville, taking sharp turns to lose him. When I found a quiet street, I stopped abruptly, turning my truck sideways to block the road. He couldn't maneuver his big bike around me. I got out, drawing my judge just enough to make my point without directly threatening him. He looked nervous, but tried to bluff. Hey, I don't know what your problem is. I just want to get home. You've been following me since I left work, I interrupted. We're 40 miles from where you belong. No more warnings. You were there when Grizzly jumped me, and now you're here alone, practically begging to get dropped. I took a step forward, raising the judge slightly. One shot, and you'll have a hole in your chest big enough to watch your life drain out. You'll be conscious long enough to know you're dying. He started to bluster, but stopped when I cocked the hammer. If you survive, tell your buddies I'm done with warnings. I've filed for a protection order. If this goes to court, I'll claim self-defense, and I doubt anyone will care if a few of you don't walk away. Hell, I might even get a humanitarian award. The biker glanced around nervously. There were no witnesses, no sirens, just silence. Now, turn that piece of junk around and head home. It's getting dark, and with no headlight, a nighttime crash seems likely. I fired a birdshot round at his headlight, shattering it without harming him. He turned and sped off, disappearing around the corner. I waited for a few minutes before heading back to my apartment. Parking behind the building as usual, I swapped the empty shell for a slug and went inside. No more Mr. Nice Guy, I muttered. The night was quiet, and I hoped it would stay that way, but peace only lasted a month. Then Mark got out of the hospital. One night, I drove home, checking my mirrors. No signs of anyone following me. I parked as usual, had a frozen meal, and watched some football before getting ready for bed. Suddenly, loud banging echoed through the apartment. Mark had found me. I turned on my phone's video recorder and called emergency, calmly explaining the situation. The dispatcher could hear Mark yelling outside and assured me help was on the way. I considered opening the door but decided against it, too risky. Instead, I waited for him to break in. It didn't take long. The door crashed open, one hinge torn from the frame as Mark charged in, grinning. "Well, craphead, time to pay for your mistake," he growled, raising his hands to strike. He didn't notice the judge in my hand until I fired twice, aiming low to stop his advance. He staggered, hands dropping, confusion on his face. As he stumbled forward, 2 more bikers entered the apartment, clearly there to finish what he'd started. I didn't give them the chance. I aimed carefully, firing 2 more shots, each one stopping a threat before things got worse. The slugs did their job. No dramatic movie-style falls, just bodies hitting the floor and groaning in pain. I called emergency again, this time requesting ambulances. As I reloaded the judge, the sound of sirens grew louder, mingling with the fading roar of motorcycles. It seemed Mark's remaining friends didn't want to stick around for an interview. The 2 bikers I shot were alive, breathing and writhing in pain, likely hit in the abdomen. Mark, however, was in worse shape, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. Even then, he wouldn't stop talking. "You a-hole, why didn't you just die when I hit you? She's mine now." I looked him dead in the eye. "I told her to warn you. I'd avoid you if you stayed away, but if you came after me, I'd put you down like a rabid dog. Clearly, you didn't listen. Maybe your friends will learn before it's too late." Mark coughed, trying to say something, but I leaned in close, turning off the video recorder. "You think you're tough? I have friends who don't ask questions. They just make people like you disappear. No one will find you. No one will know what happened. Just a hole in the ground." By the time the cops arrived, Mark was barely conscious. The other 2 bikers were groaning in pain, and I was calmly sitting on my couch, the judge unloaded on the table beside me. The officers took statements and collected evidence. They seemed more irritated with the bikers than with me, likely because of their criminal records. As paramedics loaded Mark and his friends into the ambulance, I watched silently. He glared at me, muttering curses under his breath. I didn't care. He'd made his choice, and he wasn't walking away unscathed. Mark's eyes glazed over, and he took his last breath before I could say anything else. When the cops arrived, I made sure not to appear threatening. I knelt on the floor, the judge open with shells in front of me, hands behind my head. The first officer kept his weapon trained on us while they cuffed me. They also cuffed the 2 injured bikers, who, despite being down, still had knives and brass knuckles on them when searched. Ambulances arrived and rushed the bikers to the trauma center, pale and barely hanging on. After reading me my Miranda rights, the cops started questioning me. I had them contact my attorney, and once he arrived, I gave a full statement. They took my phone, confirming the time-stamped emergency call, along with photos of my injuries and messages from Lisa. With plenty of evidence backing me, I wasn't too worried about the outcome. I was booked on charges of manslaughter, assault, and firearms violations. The detective warned there could be more charges, but after a night in jail, I was released on my own recognizance. By then, the press had already spun the story in my favor. The DA received numerous calls demanding my release, and though charges were still pending, I knew I'd be fine. I had friends who could arm me again if things got dicey. The DA informed me that Lisa was changing her story, claiming Mark came to make peace and hire me as his accountant. I couldn't help but laugh. The recordings told a different story, and the DA hoped this was the end of the violence. Lisa was waiting outside the station, seething. "You butcher! How dare you kill my man? He just wanted to bury the hatchet." She tried to slap me, but 2 nearby cops quickly restrained her. My attorney had her charged with assault, and they hauled her away. Since my apartment was now a crime scene, Brian took me to his place. We decided it was time to end things once and for all. My attorney filed for divorce, and Brian and I had a council of war regarding Mark's friends. Some old friends from the neighborhood agreed to help ensure the bikers didn't try anything stupid. First order of business. Tony's, the bar where this all started, suddenly sold to a group of investors. It was set to close for renovations, with plans to turn it into a kids' party venue. The bikers would have to find a new hangout. Before Tony's closed for good, A couple of tough guys, clearly packing heat, sat down at the biker's usual table. Word got around quickly. Any retaliation against me would bring serious consequences, involving people with reputations worse than mine. Over the next few weeks, the charges against me were quietly dropped. Lisa tried stirring up trouble, but the DA reminded her that lying to the police was a felony. She finally admitted that Mark wasn't there to hire me. He wanted revenge. She didn't seem sorry. Maybe she really thought she loved him. Regardless, I had to give her half of my publicly known assets, but it was worth it to get her out of my life. Of course, publicly known assets only tell part of the story. After the final hearing, I heard from a friend that Lisa got an unexpected visit from a very unpleasant woman. Whatever was said during that visit convinced Lisa to move far away. She even dropped a lawsuit about hidden assets. I'm not sure what was said, but it got the message across. While Lisa was still in the house, I made sure it was repaired and upgraded. She paid the rent, just as I instructed. After Mark met his end and the divorce was finalized, I sold the house and deposited half the proceeds into her account, officially severing our financial ties. Oh, and yes, I got my tools back. The police gave me a warning, saying they'd be keeping an eye on me, but I just smiled and reloaded the judge. Even after my unnamed friend sent a final message to the biker club, I stayed prepared. Some people never learn their lesson. I kept working at the same accounting firm, and many of my old clients from the neighborhood stuck with me. My boss didn't ask too many questions, happy with the revenue I brought in. I also kept my go bag ready, just in case things got too hot again. After everything that happened, a few sharp cops were piecing together little clues, and I knew it wouldn't take much for them to start connecting the dots. Recently, my boss sent me down to Baja, Mexico, to help a new client figure out how to clean up some dirty money and turn it into legitimate revenue. He's a decent guy, but for some reason, he keeps asking me if I like stew. And as for dating, I go on real dates occasionally, but I mostly keep things casual. I've got a few friends with benefits, and that suits me fine. The true loves of my life right now are my two new German Shepherd puppies. Waking up to those two wagging their tails and showering me with kisses reminds me that, despite everything, life is pretty damn good.